the People's Republic of China establishment, they control quite strictly. So it's not easy to move around. If you have established connection to overseas, the mindset change, right? You will think that, oh, I can leave. But people who live in the mainland, like much more inland, it's much more difficult for them to leave. Guangdong people are famous for knowing how to save money and do business. I think that has to do with their geographic location, because it used to be the port, right? Very important merchant center of China. So many merchants. And the culture of merchants are less problem is better. Let's just work together. If there's money, if there's profit, great, we're friends.
My understanding, I don't have this based on a lot of info, is that a much higher percentage of overseas Chinese, both in the US, but also in parts of Southeast Asia, generally came from Guangdong Province.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. Yeah, I think they have a geographic location factor, and they were one of the earliest port that was opened to the foreign countries. So it was natural that some people, they just go with a boat and go somewhere else because it's very difficult to do business sometimes, and they want to look for new opportunities. So they would go to Southeast Asia and settle there, and then they would go to the other continents. And in general, the Cantonese food are easier to accept by foreigners than some other Chinese food that is very spicy, heavy flavor, Yeah. So Cantonese food had always been popular, or one of those first restaurants in the foreign countries.
Yeah, that was my sense in the US, that when people thought of Chinese people, this would have been in like the 1950s and 60s and 70s. They're essentially thinking about what would be Cantonese culture. Cantonese people, in terms of people speaking Cantonese. For food, I would think dim sum, something like that, right? You go out. And that people who spoke Mandarin, who were from other parts of China, they didn't really come to the US until much more recently, really sort of like the 1990s and later. And that there became sort of a language split in Chinese communities that often would settle in different areas of the same city in the US. And in the case of certainly New York and San Francisco, I think.
Yeah, I think partially it's because of politics. The Cantonese people had a history of emigration from China. So many of them had family connection overseas already, which facilitates them moving out. And people who live in inland during the earlier years of the People's Republic of China establishment, they control quite strictly. So it's not easy to move around. Whereas if you have the history, if you have established connection to overseas, the mindset change, right? You will think that, oh, I can leave. But people who live in the mainland, like much more inland, it's much more difficult for them to leave. And speaking of emigration, another region that emigrate out a lot is the Shanghai and Jiangsu, all the coast area.
Yeah.
They had a history of emigration.
Okay. Yeah. Do you know where they went, or is it sort of the same places as people from Guangdong? It's just now there was a group of people from sort of, Shanghai, Jiangsu, that sort of area. Zhejiang. Yeah.
There are some political issues in where they move. Interestingly, in most countries, you will see a lot of Cantonese immigrants. But when I went to Spain, the Chinese community in Spain do not speak Cantonese. They speak Wenzhou dialect. Wenzhou dialect is an extremely difficult dialect that we thought it's closer to Japanese than Chinese. So we don't understand that.
Where do they, other than the overseas people in Spain, where in China would they speak that?
Where in China they stayed, it's closer to Shanghai. Yeah, it's Jiangsu.
Jiangsu, okay.
So more to the northern east coast of China, right?
So we've established, right, Mandarin's the main language. That's the official language of China. And when people say Chinese, they're referring to Mandarin. You have Cantonese, right, which is very much still a language that's around. It's a smaller language, though, but it's spoken very heavily by overseas Chinese. and it's located in Guangdong Province. And what are some other languages that would be spoken fairly widely, or at least at a province level in China, other than, let's say, Mandarin or Cantonese?
I think Hakka is spoken quite widely. Hakka is spoken in Taiwan and also in Fujian province. And a lot of overseas Chinese from those regions still speak Hakka.
I heard that there was also sort of again, like a Shanghainese dialect as well, that sometimes just, it's called like Wu. Is that?
吴语, yes,
Okay.
yes. And those are spoken too. Yeah.
Okay. All right. And is there anything in terms of languages, because my understanding is that the general sense in the country is trying to make Mandarin the language that basically everyone speaks. Are there certain languages that you're aware of that have sort of more or less protection by, like within the country, or is it, if you know kind of what I mean by that?
I sort of do, yes. I think languages of the ethnic minorities are less protected.
Okay.
Dialects of the Han people are more protected.
Okay.
I think mainly because the government is hoping that we can have a more homogenized culture of the Han culture. And the ethnic minorities, sometimes their language is closer to other foreign languages than Chinese. For example, Tibetan, it's completely foreign language to us. The written system is different. Mongolian and languages in Xinjiang, languages in Southeast China mountain area is closer to Southeast Asian language like Cambodian, Thai, Lao. Yeah, those are endangered for sure.
Yeah. Going back to the Han, you mentioned that you described them as dialects, sort of the different Han dialects, which is, this idea. So if we take Mandarin, we take Cantonese, we take Hakka, we take Woyu, how, like, if you ran into someone, right, and they were speaking Hakka or Mandarin, how mutually intelligible would those be to each other? Are they really more like, I mean, Cantonese, my sense is that is really a separate language. Like, that's not mutually intelligible with Mandarin. You do not know what the other person's saying if they're speaking Cantonese and you're speaking Mandarin. What about some of these other ones, though? Are they also, like, they're functionally a separate language, or are they, you could kind of figure out what the person's saying and you could communicate with them?
I think in general, the northern Chinese dialects are easier to understand than southern Chinese dialects. I can understand people from Dongbei, the northeast region, with their accent. I understand them without problem because they're very close to Mandarin. But if I go to Hubei, like my hometown, if I don't speak the Hubei dialects, I sort of understand like 30, 40%, even 50%, I'll say. But if I go more deeper into like Cantonese, Hakka, Oyu, I don't understand anything they say.
Yeah, I'm trying to think of those linguistic maps of China that I've looked at in the past, and Mandarin, it's like this big band that kind of goes across from the northeast all the way kind of to the central southwestern area, but then it's not quite an oval shape, but something like that, which is just all of like southern kind of southeastern China are just these patchwork of different languages that Mandarin's, other than being like the national language, it's not really the language that people often are speaking probably to each other on a daily basis. Is that, accurate? That's interesting.
There's another language in Guangdong. I think there are mainly three languages in Guangdong province. Cantonese, Hakka, and Tiuzhao.
What's that last one?
Tiuzhao, it's another language that I don't understand. Close to Southeast languages.
Like Vietnamese or Thai or something like that?
Something like that,
okay.
yeah.
Interesting.
Province also has that dialect. But Mandarin came later to Guangdong Province.
Okay. So the languages